Great, guys. This is Quest 34, and we're actually on the Orkney Islands. Now, I think I'm just going to start off by starting at the point where we are, and then drag you back kicking and screaming right to the beginning. And it was quite interesting. Today was quite a profound day. We had, in fact, the last 2 days have been quite profound, really. We've had things, or seen things, that we weren't expecting to see, which was quite nice, in really pleasant ways. But one thing that stuck in my head today was the fact that we met a chap at an antiques centre and heritage centre. So he does like all these antique stuff in a big barn, and there's a static caravan there and God knows what. But it's full, it's a real treasure trove. And it really stuck in my head what he said today. He said people come to the island and buy these houses because they're obviously a lot cheaper than down where they are in, say, central London or Birmingham or Manchester or Cambridge. And they buy these houses up here on the island. And what they don't realise is the island life. Well, island life, as we've discovered, is beautiful. It certainly suits my character, and certainly Janice's, I'm sure, and our psyche. But for a lot of people, if you're looking for a nightclub, discotheques, whatever you want, big restaurants and eating out and large pubs and frantic brawls on a Friday night, you're not going to get it on this beautiful island. What you are going to get is some very quaint little hotels with a little bar. You're going to get lovely little bistros, and you're going to be really looking at Stromness and Kirkwall as your two main places. And so, yeah, I find it hard to believe that people, obviously it's true, but I find it hard to believe that people actually buy property without really researching and understanding the area. It doesn't make sense. But it's that really stuck in my head today. So much so that when I got back out of intrigue and nosiness, I actually searched online for the properties on the Orkney Islands and surrounding area, and at this point in time there's 138 properties for sale across the entire island, and out of those 39 are actually under offer, which only leaves you with 99 homes. So across the entire island there's only 99 houses for sale, and some of them are derelict little bungalows that have fallen apart, need a full renovation, 20-50 grand. Going up to something that is rather nice actually, for about £275,000. So you can see why people try to come to the island. But to be honest, you know, it's a totally different way of living life, and it's beautiful. I just think it's really beautiful. But from Orkney, let's just take you back, kicking the screen right to the beginning, which seems like an eternity now, really, a long time ago, really. It was. We'll take you back to Friday, the 25th of February. Obviously we're currently in sort of like the 9th straight 10th of March, tomorrow, 10th of March, tomorrow night today. We went originally, when we left Cambridge, we had a plan to go all the way up to the top of the Orkney Islands and right back down again, and stopping at different churches and things. Keystone Church is on the way. Now, what we mean by Keystone Churches, these are research papers and documents that hint that at certain points in time, if the Grail existed, it would have been in those specific locations. Now, albeit well, those churches weren't there at that given point in time, but what people, or some school of thought, say is that those particular churches were built on the land or the area where the Grail is said to have taken refuge for, say, 9 years, 10 years, 20 years. So that's what we mean by Keystone Churches, and it moves on. I think that's not really the point, really. The point is you've got to work out if it's real, who is moving this Grail? It isn't about where the Grail is, really. It's about why are they moving it, why is it hidden, and who are these people anyway? I mean, they're the questions people need to be asking themselves. So, anyway, so we went on this jaunt, as it were, this quest, and we ended up at the first one at Church Pulverbatch, which is St Edith's Church. Now, St Edith's Church is a Keystone Church. It's certainly got some very interesting medieval origins. It was rebuilt in 1853, the West Tower in 1773. Now, it's purported or relayed and said that the Grail may have been there from 368 AD to 450 AD. So it's a fair chunk of time. What we do know with these churches is that they are built on older areas, ancient sites, sacred sites, even back potentially in certain areas to the Neolithic period. So we're looking at a lot of thousands of years that have gone by. And then someone, I mean, why did they build the church there? What was the point of being it built there? Well, why is it there? The first point is they normally tend to go for high mounds, don't they? So they look prominent on the area. So they're normally on a larger or higher level land than the rest of whatever settlements are going to be around them. So they try and make it, back in the day, they were very much made a focal point. Obviously in today's world it's a totally different game. What we see is churches closing and churches not in use and boarded up and sold for reasonable sums of money that just goes back into the church fund and disappears and back beyond, presumably to pay for the bishop's Florida holiday or his trip to New York, I guess. Clearly, obviously, on religious purposes. So, but that's generally what happens. A lot of the churches tend to close down over time. So it's a shame because they're beautiful buildings, they have historic value, they are libraries in themselves. Even if you're not religious, they're a library. You get a chance to see that snapshot in time in real life, in this time. And I think that's quite worth saving, really. And I admire these organisations like the Churches Trust, who take on these churches and make sure that they're going to be preserved. So, Edith Church, lovely church there, in Pulverbatch, which for those who may or may not know, it's in the Shrewsbury area, if you can pronounce that correctly, Shrewsbury. But wonderful little church there. We then went on to the Church of the Holy and Undivided in Edale. Now we got there quite late, so it was quite eerie actually driving down that lane where it was dark, and we got some interesting night shots that we had put on Facebook, and I'm sure Janice have put on website and YouTube as well, all the media inlets and outlets. And yeah, so there's quite an interesting experience there. It was quite weird. Obviously we couldn't get into that church, sadly. It is a Keystone Church. Grail potentially there between sort of 533 AD potentially. Earlier church was there, we know that much. It was 1633 when that church was there, and it was prior a chapel on grounds, and in 1886 a new church was consecrated. So it always seems to have these buildings and buildings on top. They'll sort of take something down or skim it down and then rebuild or extend, more to the point. So that was in Edale, so we got there. We then stayed in a little penthouse in the area of Kendal, which was quite nice, and yeah, a very quaint little area to be fair. And then we went on to Skelsmergh, St John the Baptist Church. Now, what an amazing church. Now, this is what I like, guys. Churches, I understand, I really understand the scum that go into these buildings and steal things. And that's why a lot of these churches have had to be locked, which is disappointing and just purely disgusting. But where we can, priests and vicars, whatever or ministerial roles that they have or titles that they prefer to take, whoever is in charge as the guardian of that church, I think that's a better term, the guardian of a church. Try and get it open. For God's sake, let's get these churches open. Because there's no point having this church that's costing money each year and the land it's worth on is valued at thousands or hundreds of thousands of pounds. And it sits there dormant, looking all pretty inside, with no one actually going in. It makes no point or purpose, really. So we need to get these churches open, and even if they diversify into other activities, that will be a really good thing. But St John's Skelmore Kendal, that was a beautiful part inside. Keystone Church again, Grail there, 311 AD through to 368 AD. The current one is built in 1869. Now, again, it's on an earlier foundation. So it's an interesting point about how, if we look at the Grail Trail, as it were, the Grail Path, the Path of the Grail, how it comes through Blighty, comes through England, pops a little bit into Wales, comes back up to Scotland, and so on and so forth. So again, we've got to ask ourselves, well, why would that path be taken? There has to be a significance to why that particular track of path was taken. Is it ley lines? I don't know. Is it energy levels? Is it something to do with geothermal lines? Is it something to do with the fact that it was just convenient and the people that were the guardians of the Grail at that point in time just happened to be in those areas and know those areas? So was it local knowledge that allowed the Grail to be passed on to different guardians in different areas? So, you know, it leaves a multitude of questions and absolutely answers nothing. Which is fascinating. It's fascinated people for a millennia, isn't it, really, and beyond. So that's the Kendal Church, which is lovely. We then went on to the Holy Trinity Church at Coverham. Now, this is a particular church that I have great passion about, because the Lord Robert de Neville, who was born in 1223 in Coverham, Yorkshire, and obviously died in Middleham, which is obviously just the next part down, so it's all the same area, Middleham, really. In fact, there's a book written about the Nevilles of Middleham, or Middleham Nevilles. And anyway, he died in 1282, so he was 59 years old when he died, my 21st great-grandfather. And he went to that said church. Now again, it was wonderful to be there. It really felt like home, beautiful church, but it was closed. Under church's trust. Why do we not? If we don't trust the public, which is wrong, we should have a level of trust. But if we feel that the church is at risk of being robbed, battered, beaten or abused, why can't we leave these churches open? Install live CCTV. The diocese pays for it to go to a private company that monitors those cameras 24/7. It's no hardship. It's no different to having an office block that links into the Connect system and is monitored on computers 24/7. So there's no reason why these churches have to be closed. You just got to install CCTV and palm it off to a subcontractor. That's all you've got to do. And these churches could stay open 24/7. I mean, isn't it that God said that, and even Jesus said it, isn't it the fact that these chapels, these temples, these churches are supposed to be places of refuge and a place of sanctuary for people in time of need? Well, they're not going to get much sanctuary if the doors are bolted and they can't get in. So we need to think outside the box, and I think that's what apply. Each diocese undertaking CCTV systems for their churches would potentially work. I think potentially work. So anyway, the Holy Trinity Church, wonderful. Now, what I love about this church and the fact that it's connected to Lord Robert de Neville is he's not really Lord Robert de Neville. He was, but it was a creation. In the years leading up to his mother's death, so about 1263 actually, he didn't go on with his father. His mother's family line was the de Nevilles, or de Nevilles, and basically, in spite and anger, when his mother passed, he took his mother's family's name, de Neville, and that's how my Neville line started. Because as we know, all these surnames, they go back to being different surnames back in history. Be it Desposini, be it Boers, be it anything. These surnames go backwards and backwards and backwards. And so they never stay the same. Because there's always a circumstance or a point in time where an event occurs and that said person changes history or changes the future by taking a different name. And thus the Nevilles were born, and that's why it's quite based upon the Nevilles of Middleham, linked to the Holy Grail and infinity. So that's quite interesting that we've got this place, this small area in Yorkshire that's linked to infinity. Well, what does that mean? That's for you to work out, if you wish. So that's really fascinating. We did go to Malham Cove, but it was getting quite late. Malham Cove is said to have a void of space and time. Now, for those who may or may not know about voids are quite interesting points. It's about how we sort of step into a time within a time. So, I don't know, it could be the most simplest thing. You could be walking up the side of a hill, if you're able to do so as an example, and you just feel different. And then when you come down again, you feel that you haven't really lost any time. But it's almost like a time loop. I mean, time is dynamic, I believe. It's ever changing. And time doesn't just go in one direction. We could talk about quantum physics, obviously, but then we'd need another 2 hours, really. But time never travels in one clear direction. What happens if time can do that and flip itself that way? Or you can alter it, I'll flip it that way. Then you get that time within a time. So the quarters, you know, we adjust the quarters to align or realign time, as it were, which is quite interesting. So again, a fascinating subject. I mentioned it in some of my books, just to get my little plug in there for my books. So yeah, it's really good. Malham Cove, interesting place. If you ever get the opportunity to go there, please go in daylight, because at night time it will be an absolute living nightmare and quite dangerous. You know, it's sheer drops and cliffs and things. Probably not the best idea to go up there with your mates and in the pitch darkness, really. So after that, we went on to St Andrew's Church. Now, St Andrew's Church in Moffat, lovely church, built in 1055, again on older grounds, linked to Lord Guillermin of the Isles, my 33rd great-grandfather. Now, it's quite interesting because he was born in Dull in 824 AD, and he died in Caithness in 885 AD. So you can see the connections of my line going sort of up to Scotland, and then it will eventually get to Edale. So it travels through. So a beautiful, beautiful church. There's not what I could really say about that, but if you get the chance, go and have a look at this church. It is beautiful, it is lovely, the design is wonderful. I think it's almost like a little Gothic style to me, with its little turrets in certain points on the church roofs and things, so it's quite pleasant. We then went to the most fascinating, it's like going to a fairy tale land. We went to Tweedsmuir Kirk, obviously Tweedsmuir being near Biggar, Biggar as the town, or the place. And this church is just fascinating. It is like out of a fairy tale. You always expect the fair maiden to come walking around the corner. Again, it's in the same area where Lord Guillermin of the Isles was, 824 to 885 AD. So he lived to be 61 years old, which wasn't bad for the time in the sense. Did he have a good innings? I don't know, I didn't ask him. So, but there we are. So 61 years old he died. He was in that area. The church is absolutely beautiful. It's got some very interesting, I would say sort of like Swiss, Germanic, even Prussian should I say, that sort of influence on its structure. So it really makes you feel like you're in a different, like, Eastern European country. That's what it felt like. But what a beautiful church inside, and open for people, which is lovely, as they all should be. So, you know, well done for making the effort, the team there, for doing that. Brilliant. But it's a amazing church. That was really good. So we're now, believe it or not, at that point in time, we're up at Biggar. We'll then carry on to St Mary of Wedale, and what was interesting is, again, the church was closed. It was built in 1876, older grounds again. There is history of another chapel being about a mile away due east of where this particular church is, depending on how the crow flies and where you're pointing at the time, of course. Keystone Church, there is said to be a chamber below it, which is now the church hold. There is talk of the Grail in certain aspects of being there between 182 AD and 191 AD. So 9 years, a short period, a little short journey trip there, which is quite interesting. There's stories and legends of King Arthur here as well, which is quite interesting. So and I quite think it's fascinating that St Mary of Wedale has this tale of Arthurian tale. We think, well, hang on a minute, shouldn't that be down in Glastonbury or Tintagel or that area? But here we are, right up here in Scotland, and we're now getting Arthurian legends, which isn't really talked about, so that should be explored. Any Arthurian historian that wants to look should really go to St Mary of Wedale and Heriot Parish Church in this area to really find the history of Stow Church and all the bits, really. So fascinating. We then went on to stay in Madrid Court. It was a in Bathgate. And what can I say about Bathgate? It's an interesting place. The apartment itself was beautiful. It was really suited. But Bathgate sort of sits in between Glasgow and Edinburgh. It's a bit weird because it sort of takes all this loveliness from Edinburgh, and I don't mean to be disrespectful, but Glasgow's got a very long way to go to change and uplift itself with its regeneration projects. And Bathgate, it's weird, you sort of go one way and you're feeling really nice and think, oh yeah, we're heading to Edinburgh way, Roslyn way even, so sort of eastbound as the crow flies. We head west, so we've gone east over to Roslyn Chapel, but you go west to go to Glasgow, and there's a wonderful little phrase, why did you leave the west and travel east in search of lighting craft? I noticed that, I'm not surprised. I think I'd be wanting to search for lighting craft, and I think I'd be turning east as well. So, and it's horrible because the people in Glasgow that I saw, they seem lovely people. You know, they're no different to anyone else. No one's different to anyone else. We're all equal, as we should be. But there needs to be some kind of funding projects putting into Glasgow itself. You know, it needs some interesting points. Going back to where, if we travel east then, to Roslyn, we went to Roslyn Chapel. Now, we've been there a few times over the years. Obviously, as most people know, with the Dan Brown, it's all connected to the mystery of the Grail. There is talk of the Grail being there between 191 AD and 217 AD, a vault beneath the chapel, some 26 years. So that was good security, if it were there. Now, as we know, Roslyn Chapel is connected to the Sinclairs, and William Sinclair in particular, who end up being my cousins in the line of the family tree. And the Sinclairs and the Nevilles have always been in bed with each other, for want of a better term. They've always been sort of interbred. So, you know, there's lots of connections there on a personal level for me. It took about 40 years to build Roslyn Chapel, which is fascinating. Now, as we know, it was built in 1446 AD, and I've already mentioned his name, William Sinclair, Sir William Sinclair, the 11th Baron of Roslyn. He was the 3rd Prince of Orkney, which is quite interesting as well, how those titles sort of roll into each other and blend in. So Roslyn Chapel is very much worth a visit. It's been, the visitor centre is absolutely divine. They've planned it really well. Good disabled access. What can I say? It's got good level grounding to go around the place. The only thing is, for disabled people, they might not be able to get down to the lower chamber part, which would be a shame because there's no way of putting a disabled lift in or anything there. You just can't do it. But there's enough to see in Roslyn Chapel for someone in a wheelchair to go around and see very happily. There's lovely tour guides there if you need a tour guide. I personally have never used a tour guide at Roslyn because I've been there so many times and obviously connected to the Sinclairs anyway, so I don't think there's anything a tour guide could update me on, really, to be fair. But it's good for people that go there and want to get a little bit of the history, a little taste in time. Yeah, that's quite interesting. So Roslyn Chapel is a lovely place. It's got some lovely photographs there. Janet's got some lovely photographs and films there as well, which is lovely. Right, so then we went on to, and what a shame, guys. Again, it needs a grant or something, or funding, to really make it a monumental site. We went to Uttershill Castle. And I was disappointed that the local council and authorities have not put any effort whatsoever into making this a good attraction for local people and tourists and travellers. So there needs to be money really put into there, and let's save this site. There should be a campaign, I don't know why there isn't. But it was built in 1604 AD. It's connected to Sir Edward Neville, my 14th great-grandfather, who was coincidentally born 1471 in Abergavenny in Wales, obviously with the Nevilles being in Wales at that time as well, the spur of. And he sadly died on the 8th of December 1538. So he was beheaded at the Tower of London for treason. So that might be the little snippy idea why they haven't bothered with it. But when I think about it, if that's the reason why funding isn't going in, because of the treason aspect, then why have we got the Tower of London funded and put up for tourism? Because that's all about treason and beheading, isn't it? So that shouldn't be the excuse not to do anything with Uttershill Castle. And there should be work and money going to there. No, lovely place, lovely views. I felt really at ease there. I thought it was a lovely place, to be fair. We then travelled on and we went to, I missed one, I'm so sorry. We went to Kelvinbridge in Glasgow as well. Kelvinbridge Parish Church. Again, it was closed. Now that particular church, massive church, massive. It doesn't bode well when you see bars over the windows, which does sort of give the game away a bit, really. So that area does need regenerating, that is certain. And one thing that could happen, if people were to engage with the church, I don't know who the ministry is there, but they could open those doors more. They could do toddler events during the day, coffee mornings for the elderly. They could do bingo runs, if there's a facility and space inside that church to do that. And the facilities, toilets and heating, obviously. So I think most churches do have some form of toilets and some form of heating these days. So there could be much more done with that church. Again, it needs some investment. Whether it ever gets it, I'm not quite sure, really. One can only tell. Anyway, after that, we went to Dunkeld Cathedral. Now, that's a lovely, lovely, lovely place. But sadly, we couldn't get in because of the renovation that's going on. So apparently it's going to be closed for another couple of weeks. It's just probably poor timing on our behalf, really, for getting there. Fascinating history to it. Connection to the governor, Duncan MacDonachak, I had to pronounce that correct. 30th great-grandfather for me. He was born in Dunkeld in 920 AD. Quite interesting. He died in 965 AD at the Battle of Dunkeld in Perthshire. All these battles that went on. You know, this testosterone bouncing about and people wanting to knock their toys out of the wooden prams, I guess, back then. And think it's right to kill each other in a battle. It originally dates from around about 1574 AD, the existing building. But the original parts are still showing, and they're in the region of 1260 when it originally had its foundations, its cornerstone placed. And the completion of the building works finished in about in 1501. So there was ongoing work over the few centuries, people adding bits on and doing renovation projects. So that was quite fascinating in that sense, but sadly we couldn't get in. There are relics in there of St Columba. Now St Columba turns up quite a bit in Keystone churches and points of interest, so he comes up quite a bit actually. Ireland, Scotland, Wales, all the haunts, all the areas in the sense. All the Celtic regions, to be fair. So that was quite good. We then went to Blair Atoll Church. What can I say? It's a plain and pleasant land, as it's described, and by many people, it would be a plain and pleasant land. Lord Duncan was there, my 29th great-grandfather, and had interest in the area, but he was born in 949 AD in Edale in Perthshire. So he was born in the area. He died, believe it or not, back in those years, he died when he was 96 years old. That is so rare for that period of time in this current version of the human species, to be able to live to 96. So he died at 96 years old in the year 1045 AD. Amazing, absolutely amazing on the history side. Parish Church, so we've got the McAndrews connected there, we've got the Nevilles connected there. There is a definite energy line running through there. You can feel it. Yeah, interesting place, very interesting place. We went to then, after there, we travelled further up north, further higher up, to the Church of the Holy Rood in Carnoustie. And Carnoustie's, I think Carnoustie's a wonderful place. It's so vibrant, I think. It is considered the sort of Brighton of the north. Yeah, so it's hardly surprising, really. I do find it quite surprising, amazing actually, how Carnoustie could be the Brighton of the North. I wouldn't really put it as that. I think I'd rather say that Carnoustie is much more connected to somewhere like Holkham in Norfolk. And there's a great significant connection between Carnoustie and Holkham. So that's a story for another day. Yeah, I mean, the church was built, as I said, in 1836 AD. Grail potentially there between 217 AD and 232 AD. So about some 15 years in that area. Again, a very older Gothic style chapel. Again, it was closed, we couldn't get into it, but just being there was nice. The energy felt nice there, it felt friendly. People were friendly that were walking by and things, and you know, the whole area. I just love Carnoustie. But then I love Holkham and Norfolk as well. But I suppose you can only love areas until they fall into the sea, can't you? And the water wins, and they're no more, I guess. So how long Holkham and those areas, Norfolk, will survive, one can only imagine on that one. But moving away from the doom and gloom, we went to the most fantastic building, the Elgin Holy Trinity Church in Elgin. Now, Elgin is very important to me. My family line on my mother's side definitely are connected or interconnected to the Elgin area, the McAndrews, and they are, and that's probably where I get my 37% Scottish from in DNA testing. So what can I say about Elgin? Elgin's just a beautiful place. The Holy Trinity Church was amazing. It almost feels, because how you enter the church, it's a bit like the TARDIS really. It looks quite tiny on the outside, but it's absolutely enormous on the inside. Beautifully kept, beautiful artefacts, beautiful paintings, stained glass windows to absolutely die for. And this rather interesting, it's just gives me goosebumps even thinking about it, the interesting Lady Chapel. Now, as long as I sit here today alive and talking with you, perhaps in the future obviously I'll be dead, but you'll be listening to me anyway. That's your punishment to listen to me. However, without any word of doubt, I went to the Lady Chapel, and as I went to walk towards the little altar there, I was forced onto my knees. I don't mean forced, I was pushed. It was the most surreal experience I've had in quite some years. So that alone reinforced to me that we're in the right place at the right time. It reinforced to me that Holy Trinity Church is one of the most important sites in the entire United Kingdom, which I've always known, but just getting those affirmations, getting those confirmations, getting those feelings and getting that experience is enough to say, do you know what, there's something more here that probably needs a bit more investigation. As I say, it's directly linked to the Fordham line through marriage, obviously, and it was built in 1826. But the whole area, that site, it's just a fascinating area. It's a really vibrant town now as well. Is it a city? I'm not quite sure how they label themselves these days, but it's a really, really vibrant place. I met some very interesting people whilst in Elgin at various places, and they're just fun people. I'd happily live there tomorrow. You know, if anyone says, is there a place where you'd feel comfortable living, Karl? I'd say, well, yeah, Elgin would be one of them, definitely on the list. So yeah, it's such an amazing place. Inside, it's got, to say, some wonderful things. They're on the photographs and the postings that we've already done. There's some interesting symbology, obviously, to Templarism, to Masonic levels, dare I say, we'll use the term. There's some interesting points towards the Eastern Orthodox aspects of religion. So it's got a little bit for everybody in there, really. And a copious amount of fleur-de-lis. Even on the little ends of the handles for the rails going up the little steps and things inside the church, there's embedded there fleur-de-lis symbols as well. So, as we know, it's one of the most important symbols. The Tilmara is the angelic symbol, But the fleur-de-lis is very much one of the most important symbol for the living. But for the angelic side of things, we would be looking at a tilmara, or some people call it a unicursal hexagram. I wouldn't really call it or label it into a satanic form. That's poppycock. We'll leave that to the old pagan days or something. But it's not like that. The tilmara, as it's originally called, is the sign of the angels. So a very interesting point to note. So after Holy Trinity Church, we then went on to Invergordon. Now, Invergordon Parish Church is again an interesting place, but sadly it was all, I think it might have been the time of year that we were there as well, but it was very much all locked up and looked very vacant inside and very unused. Again, a sign of the times, sadly. But you need to say Invergordon Parish was connected to Earl Dunnad of Caithness. Now, he was connected to the area. He was my 32nd great-grandfather. He was born and died in the same place in Caithness. Pretty obvious, he was the Earl of Caithness. But he was 39 years old when he died. The current parish church there, you can see it's modern-ish compared to some other churches. It was built in 1560 AD, but again on an older style chapel. So that was removed and then it was rebuilt upon and rebuilt upon. And again, I think we've got to ask ourselves the questions, why do these churches get rebuilt on exactly the same foundations? Is it because the foundations are already there, so from a building point of view it's practical? Or is it because they know that particular area, that particular point in time is so sacred, is so required, that they want to hold on to it a bit longer? It's about energies, I think, in my own mind. And I think that's something to look at as well. As we know, a church isn't the church building, a church is a group of people by definition. So as we know, churches do need people to go there in order to balance their energy, balance the karma, balance the yin, the yang, whichever pathway you follow. But the key word there has to be balance. That's the main thing. After that, we went on to Wick, to St Fergus. Now that's obviously got a special place in my heart, St Fergus Church. So, again, for a multitude of reasons, because of Sir Ian Sinclair, one of my closest relatives and dear friend, who passed away a few years ago, sadly. But St Fergus Church in Wick is an amazing church. It's an arena church, so it almost to me feels like you're in Roman times, because it's got the full arena going round, almost like an amphitheatre. And that's a good comparison to make it by. It is like an indoor amphitheatre, which is quite surreal in many respects, but beautiful with it. It does beg the question whether that you'd fill all the benches and all the seats in there, because it's humongous in design. Beautiful little community hall areas, really interesting place. You've also got outside that building what is known as the Sinclair Isle. Now the Sinclair Isle is obviously a bit of a ruin now, and people haven't really looked after these things over the centuries, as often is the case with memorials and tombs and things and mausoleums and all that. They just don't get looked after. You know, time supersedes everybody, and they get forgotten about and they fade away, and nature starts to take its course, and before you know it, it disappears from existence as if it never was there. So that's often what happens with these places. But at this stage in time, the Sinclair Isle is still very prominent there. Now, in the Sinclair Isle, there is an entrance that does go down into a lower vault, but it's overgrown and it would be concealed anyway. Only a few of us would know exactly where that entrance is to the vault. So, yeah, I think it should remain hidden, really, from time and from destruction and all that sort of thing. It should remain as it should be, in peace and tranquility. So we didn't disturb it too much. But the growl is said to have been there in that area and in that said lower chamber, 241 AD to 297 AD, so some 56 years. So it was there longer than it was at Roslyn Chapel, which is fascinating from a research point, in this lower chamber. So it's a Keystone Church. It's got some amazing things with regards to, obviously, Wick being a seafaring town. There's a lot of memorial to people who have died at sea. There's a lot of reference in the church to the Great War, World War One, as it's commonly known. So, all in all, Wick Church is fascinating. It was a little bit of a shame to see Wick in its current state because of obviously people losing their businesses with the infamous COVID. And obviously now we've got an imminent war really about to happen, so that'll be fun. Inverted commas. So, yeah, it hasn't boded well really on Wick, but you know, people tend to brush themselves down, pick themselves up and start again. So I think from what I know of the past of the Wick people, they probably will do that in time in their own way, and it will work again. It will be alive again, it will be vibrant again. And I think on a weekend you can see how vibrant it is, but on a weekday it's quite well, like the Mary Celeste really. So if anyone knows what the Mary Celeste is a bit vacant really. So yeah, shame really. But St Fergus Church, as I say, amazing church to go and see. If you get a chance in your lifetime, go and see it. Come up to Scotland, see that area, it's beautiful. After that we went on to Dunnet Head, which again is very good for me. I've been to John O'Groats before, obviously just down the road, so that's pretty good. With friends, and obviously with Janice we've been to Land's End, and now we've been to Dunnet Head. So it's travelling from each point really of the landmass, as it is now. Obviously that landmass changes in just under 8 years. So, but at the moment the current landmass is as it is. We went to the furthest point to point in current time, so that was quite good. Dunnet Head, cold, windy, some really interesting World War II like bunker style shelters and little outposts still there, obviously because it's straight onto the coast. Lovely lighthouse there, obviously beaming out to sea. Not much more I can say about that, just a pure point of interest, a pure place of interest, just to go there. I think realistically you could probably spend yourself an hour at Dunnet Head, that's probably long enough. About an hour, allow yourself an hour if you're there, which is good. It might be worthwhile mentioning now that on the way through originally onto the Orkney Islands we did try and get to the Italian chapel. Now the Italian chapel at the moment, sadly, again it's just poor timing. I've been in the Italian chapel many times over the years when I lived up here, and it's amazing artistry work in there. As we know, it's all to do with the prisoner of war, or prisoners of war that built the Italian chapel, the Italians, out of this barn, basically like a pig barn all the way through, and then it was all developed and they put a porch on, and so they made it into their own place of worship in the sense. Worship, I hate to use the term, but most people are familiar with. I think I prefer it to be a place of spiritual guidance. That in a modern day world, I think that's probably where the church needs to head really. Say they're a place of spiritual guidance, not worship, because to worship something means that you're inferior and you're subservient. And yet we see in the Bible so many times the references to I'm a servant of the Lord, or servant comes in, that word servant comes in so many times. So it just reinforces to people, wrongly really. So I think we should say that these are places of spiritual guidance. That would be a better terminology. The Italian chapel is fascinating to see, I say purely from the World War II historical aspect, and secondly from the artistry work, how artistic and beautiful all over the roof they are going through to the altar. And the altar is quite interesting. You can see that online if you just click and punch in Italian chapel at Orkney. You can see a lot of pictures all over the internet of inside the chapel. So it's worthwhile looking at some of those because you'll get some clues about different things there, which is good. Back to the here and now. We also recently visited St Magnus Cathedral. Now, St Magnus Cathedral is magnificent, but it is magnificent, and it's got some interesting points in there. We have the healing stone. There's a healing stone within the area there, which is spoken about many times over the years. Obviously you go for the main window, the St Magnus Cathedral window over at the high altar, so we managed to get some good photography there as well. It's a point of interest again for St Magnus Cathedral, really. It's got a copious amount of skulls, skeletons, skull and crossbones, egg timers, everything interconnected with Freemasonry. But then it's again a bit like the chicken and the egg. Well, Freemasonry didn't create that. That is older. That created Freemasonry in that sense. So on one of the stones inside the cathedral, it reminded me so much of the third degree tracing board, and it does cover all that, like the points in time being the egg timer. We've got. I know sometimes if you have a bit of knowledge or interest in one subject area, you can look at something and your brain makes you believe that it's connected because you want to believe it's connected. On this occasion, that wasn't the case. It was so profound to see that particular tombstone, and it was most important to see some of the artistry work and the hand movements on certain stained windows. They always tell their own story as well. So, worth a visit. St Magnus Cathedral and Kirkwall. As we know, Kirkwall is the main place on the island. Nice little place, friendly people again. Really worth a visit. We were going to go to the ORKNEY Museum, but it was closed again, I think, because of the time of the year. But to be quite frank, I think we saw enough of ORKNEY's history in that single moment in St Magnus Cathedral. So whether we need to go into ORKNEY Museum, and perhaps if you take children they might, because it's a bit of interesting things for them, but from an adult perspective I really don't see any point or purpose of going into the museum itself. You see enough in the cathedral, to be honest. Now the following day it was a blustery, stormy day, and that will show on the cameras and the footage that we've got. But we did manage, rightly or wrongly, to go to the Ring of Brodgar in a storm force wind, as you do. And we went there, and what an amazing place. It had been, I think in my video I did it, it's been 33 years since I last touched a particular stone, and I had great pleasure in touching that bound stone for that period of time. And it's almost quite weird, because when I look back and think, my God, 33 years ago, that's a long time that's gone. I can't get it back. You can't get it back. No one can get it back. It's gone. You know, you're in the here and now, wherever that may be, but you're in the here and now. So for me, it was quite a poignant subject to be able to walk around those stones again. And it's almost like I was reliving that time 33 years ago when I last touched those stones. Yeah, it was a surreal but beautiful experience there. Again, it's a national monument, we know that already. You know, it's a Neolithic henge as it's described, a stone circle in mainland Orkney, but I think it was something more than that. And I think people that have got any craft knowledge would realise that it's got much more meaning and purpose to it. So, yeah, the Ring of Brodgar, very nice indeed. We did go down into Stromness. Now, Stromness is one of the smaller little towns, really. Kirkwall being the biggest. Stromness, I think, comes in second best, but still one of the second best, one of the best really. Now, Stromness itself is, I suppose, it's a very interesting place, really. The museum was sadly closed, but the photography that we were able to get just in those really tiny cobbled high street, streets and roads, And it's fascinating to see how the local people seem to manage the fact that they can be shopping, walking down there as if it's a pedestrianised area. Well, it's not, obviously. And then a car comes and people just naturally stop and go to the edge, and the car goes through, and then the people carry on their merry way. So it doesn't seem to bother them too much, because it is quite tight in the actual main part of the town of Stromness. Skara Brae, we did try that again, but because of the storm force wind, sadly we couldn't go in there. I've been there personally many times over the years. It's a very good experience to have. But anyway, we did go inside and speak to the staffing team and that, and because of the winds, you know, health and safety, blah blah blah, they couldn't really open that, sadly. There is a reference in some of the paperwork over the years that I've found, is that Skara Brae is considered the proposed site of the landing, as it's translated. What that means, who knows? But it's about it makes a reference to the landing. So that was Skara Brae. The whole experience has been absolutely wonderful so far. This is the longest quest we have ever done. We're still on the quest. So we are now at a stage where we leave Orkney Islands tomorrow, travel some 280-ish miles, fairly long journey, to get from Coiloo on the Orkney Islands right down to Brocourt on the Western Isle near Ayr, AYR, or near the Isle of Mull actually, to be precise. We're about one hour's drive from the ferry to get to Isle of Mull, where we'll be going, so this is like a pit stop stay halfway, so then we can go to the Isle of Mull and come back. So there'll be a bit of more videos about that when we arrive in Argyll and Bute districts in Scotland. But all in all, wonderful trip so far.